today, really what I wanted to do is just share with you a few thoughts that I had regarding the future of film as culture diplomacy, possible opportunities that there might be for culture diplomacy to do more than it is currently doing. And then what I wanted to do is actually reserve as much time as you'd like for interactive discussion. Either content questions about the conference so far, other examples that you might like to share with others of work that you're doing. Some of you have also contacted me and requested individual meetings that we can discuss certain projects that you have. We can do it obviously in private if you really like. On the other hand, I'd actually recommend to actually have that meeting, so to speak, as a group, because by hearing your project, you may actually inspire someone else who has a similar project. It's also a great way for you to actually learn what are the other people interested in, and ideally we can actually have some partnerships already emerging from this conference. So if you're able to, we're not expecting PowerPoint presentations or business plans, share with us an idea that you have regarding a possible project in culture diplomacy. And I can obviously tell you how ICD may or may not be able to support you. And I'm sure there are other people in the room who may also be inspired by your idea and say, hey, I know a journalist or I know a foundation. And you might also be able to get additional partners in the meantime. So what I wanted to do with you today is maybe just share with you one second example. As you may remember, the opening lecture, I gave you an example of one of the Marshall Plan films, The Shoemaker and the Hatter, where it was essentially a film governmentally funded from the USA, which was trying to essentially get Europeans excited about many of the quote-unquote American ideals, mass production, free trade, etc. And at that time, those were actually major transitions for Europe. Now, of course, European Union, it's the way it goes. However, we are having, of course, the free trade debates with other parts of the world. So I thought that was an interesting way to begin. What I wanted to share with you, if the internet connects, cooperates with us, which it's looking like it may not be, is a second film, also from the Marshall Plan, which is actually, again, an older film, but the idea that it's getting across is a newer idea. And I think actually it is perhaps an interesting idea for us to look at as one model for culture diplomacy for now. So let me see if this will work. If not, I can just tell you about the film, and as homework you guys can read it. But it was a different kind of a film with a different kind of a goal. Let's see if it'll load on the one browser, and I'll read on the other. Otherwise, again, lunch is waiting, so I don't want to take too much time for another film. You've seen many of them this week, but it is always fun to at least see a little clip So we'll see if it works. But this film, let me tell you about it first, and then I'll explain to you why I think it's an interesting example also for culture diplomacy and film as culture diplomacy in the future. First of all, the film is, where are we here? So yeah, 1950, French film. Looks like it's cooperating, good. At an alpine resort, children of various nationalities on vacation with their parents engage in contests in the snow. At first, they do not understand each other. The national rivalries come to the fore. But when the little English girl is accidentally hurt, they chip in to buy her chocolates from the local bakery. The film is beguiling, especially in the way it is filmed. You see only the feet of the adults until the funny final frame. May it be a lesson to the adult world, the narrator concludes. So what they're trying to do here is show how these European kids suddenly are there, they have to play together, they haven't played together before, they don't speak the same language, they have many different differences, but somehow it eventually kind of works. And I think what they're trying to show here is through the diversity of the actual different kids who are there, the different languages, the different culture, basically proving a very simple point: diversity works. And actually, we can make this crazy European idea, as crazy as it sounded back in 1950, we can make it work. And despite all those differences can actually even be an asset as opposed to a liability. So again, for us, it sounds like a really simple idea, but just imagine Second World War, you'd just been fighting with all of your neighbors. France and Germany had never really had peace, in so long. And now suddenly, this is a team where everyone needs to play together and move ahead. So the reason why I think this is interesting is perhaps, a film like this in a newer form could be also relevant today, given challenges we have of migration, etc. What does the German team today look like, so to speak, to use the analogy? And is this team playing effectively? If you look at all of the different human beings who are currently living in Germany, are they working effectively as a team? If not, how might they improve that? And that's also an issue that the ICD is quite involved in terms of also the German-Syrian dialogue and also beyond. So it looks like this is working. So let me show you just 2 or 3 minutes just to give you an idea for this film. The one interesting point that I mentioned earlier with the film is they've filmed it from the perspective of kids. So you imagine they actually purposely lowered the video cameras to give you also the perspective that you're also one of these kids. An interesting film trick at the time. So let's be childish. Let's see if it works. And again, I'm skeptical regarding the internet, so if not, it's not a big deal. Again, I explained to you guys how to find this film on the internet, but I keep our fingers crossed that it works. It's looking like it may not be working, so well, we can let it go in the background. So maybe turn on the lights, Esteban. It looks like we may have to give up on this, which is a shame. The internet was working well before. This other link any better? Strange, we're online, although for some reason it's not loading. But it's okay, as I said, you guys have had many films already this week, so not the end of the world. Okay. Yeah, it looks like it's not going to work. But again, so the larger point that I wanted to take from this, well, let it run just in case. The larger point that I wanted to take from this is, again, what role does film and TV have to serve sort of as a role model for society? We had a lecture about a week ago with some of our graduate students I gave, where I was giving a thesis that the cultural diplomacy of the future should be about listening as opposed to speaking. And there, one of the examples that I gave, actually gave a number of examples, was of different films that in many ways I was trying to make the point, we're serving as a mirror of society. And I think in many ways, art and film can do that to reflect, certain challenges a society is facing, certain opportunities, certain aspects of diversity, etc. And that was what I wanted to show you with this film, Let's Be Childish, how at that time they were trying to reflect sort of the current reality that Europe suddenly found itself in, the beginning of this European and cool club or union, as it was called, and what would later come, I think no one really expected at that time with the European Union. So maybe a small points where I think film can actually perhaps serve as a vehicle for cultural diplomacy to reflect the current situation of a society in a way maybe that could be more profound than a speech or a book or some other form of trying to summarize that. And the second point I would make is, again, this reflection can also maybe lead us in a certain direction by looking at very there's a question about, what's that? Yeah, no problem, no problem. Isam has a very big party today, so don't mind Isam. There's a little bit of noise in the background. In case you guys are interested and you're around, we're expecting over 700 people. I was actually here myself last Saturday for the Saturday party, and it was crazy, so it was really a success. So I'd encourage anyone who would like to come tonight, come. I think it starts at around 9 or 10 o'clock. But there's a lot of preparations my team will do in the background, so don't mind them as we speak. And hopefully you guys can come for part of that as well. But that was the second point that I wanted to make, that the film can also, I think, lead us to a certain destination and can somehow inspire. And there have been many studies about this as well, where you have more diversity in TV shows, more diversity in films, which definitely does have a proven effect in terms of also changing the way people may think, whether it's a child growing up, etc. I've even witnessed it with my own kids in terms of really them being, I think, so colorblind, not only in terms of races, in terms of religions, etc. Just the fact that they grew up in a household where the mother is Muslim, the father is Christian, the father is American, the mother is Tunisian, just all of that. And you definitely can see firsthand, okay, they don't see things the way other kids sometimes do, especially in Germany, I've noticed, also in kindergartens, etc., just to give a personal note. So I think there's something to this. I think film in many ways can actually break down barriers in a powerful way. The final thing I'll just make from my point of view that I think is special about film, I'm sure many have spoken about this week as well, is the accessibility of film. One of the big problems of culture in the past is that we didn't have access to it. It was either expensive in an opera hall or a museum or some intellectually elite location or venue. Maybe it was expensive. I did my thesis in Paris, actually, Institut Politique, looking at jazz and actually the history of jazz in France and the USA. And in France, when jazz was beginning, jazz was a very expensive, a very exclusive thing. At the same time in the USA, where jazz was underground in basements in Harlem, New York, it was in Salle Pleyel, one of the most expensive concert halls in Paris. Very expensive, very exclusive. So that traditionally has been one of the challenges of cultural diplomacy in the 20th century. Very often we wanted to do the high arts, and we wanted to really show what we considered the best things about our culture, which didn't necessarily assist in terms of accessibility. And this is maybe the comparison of hip-hop as opposed to opera today. If you really wanted to reach the masses in Palestine, in Egypt, and wherever, what would be the best mechanism for doing that? Probably not Beethoven or Mozart. And I think those are also important things we need to keep in mind when we think, can culture really reach people? What culture? And what culture can people really relate to and have accessibility to? So that's, again, maybe just as a final point, one of the reflections that I wanted to share with you about a potential that film has always had, and I think it still has today, maybe more so today, with also the advancement of the internet, with YouTube and everything. I think it's great in the sense I can, very quickly with YouTube find pretty much any artist I want from around the world, whether I'm preparing for a lecture or trying to share my kids some cool video, whether it's in North Korea, South Korea, Tunisia, USA, or wherever. And that's really cool. I think that accessibility, despite issues of, let's say, people earning off of this. In the sense, one of the big debates is, of course, obviously downloading music illegally is a problem. So putting that issue aside, I think at least the accessibility itself, even if it's just part of a song or part of a film, can be a great asset and can give us greater access than we've ever had before. So let me stop there. I wanted to just offer a few reflections from my side. Not an expert in film for culture diplomacy, but someone who has given a lot of thoughts to culture diplomacy as a whole, and who really does have a very high interest in the field of film as culture diplomacy. What I'd like to do now is to stop with the lecture and give you guys immediately a chance to ask questions. I may or may not be able to respond to them. Instead, I'm not an expert when it comes to film, but I may be able to offer you some perspectives from the side of culture diplomacy. And I'd also love to hear from you maybe other examples you'd like to share. We can also debate various things, or even debriefings, and say, hey, Mark, I really didn't understand what this one speaker was trying to get at about this, or what do you think about this thesis that the other speaker said, which for me is really crazy. This is also a chance for us, without other VIPs or speakers in the room, to really have an open discussion and a debate about those issues as well. And as I said, I know you haven't had lunch. On the other hand, I am all yours. So in that sense, really feel free to be open and to share any questions that you might like to ask, or make any points that you might like to debate or offer for discussion. So I will stop with the unilateral, and let's immediately go to the multilateral. Who would like to go first? Questions, comments? Yes, Tatiana? Do you guys want a wireless mic? Is that better? Yeah, maybe just to make sure we're not so many in the room, but it's easier just so we don't have to strain our ears.
So thank you for this opportunity, as well as all other opportunities for us to be here and to share significance of arts, all field of arts, for peace building and building bridges and networks and initiatives and positioning them on a significant level, and to reach more relevance, to reach more recognition, and to get with each other in contact, to know each other, what is very important to get better connected. It is people-to-people diplomacy, cultural diplomacy, what happens here at the ICD. Previously, we had another conferences, another issues, and other meetings, but today I also pointed out in my lecture, it is important to have common stage where we can go beyond just attraction and entertainment. What's the role of arts mostly? We are not just contributing to the conference as decoration. We have here opportunity to show more beyond that, and to reach more significance and relevance for all issues in international relations. So thank you for that. This is just a comment to underline the importance of this space here, and also your contribution and activities. Thanks.
Thank you, Tatiana, and I'm glad that you could also be with us today. Tatiana has been with the ICD a long time, actually, representing us at conferences also, and no, it's great to have you here, and thank you for that. But let's continue. Questions, comments, as well as also suggestions regarding possible projects that we can actually do together. It looks like you guys are all in need of a coffee, but yes, okay, good. Okay, now I'm starting to see a few hands. Okay, excellent.
Hello. Thanks for your...
Hey, hold it close to your lips if you can. Yours.
Okay. I'm just saying that thanks very much for your lecture or your my question is, as someone new to cultural diplomacy, it is just basically inquiring about who should really take charge of cultural diplomacy, considering that culture is so diffused in society, and so who should, be responsible for leading the way, in cultural diplomacy? Is it government or is some other agencies?
No, it's a very good question, and we actually didn't have so much of a chance in the conference to discuss this, but it's a topic that I really have given a lot of thought to. And I think the first answer that I have for you is actually it's all of our responsibility, in the sense that it's something really at a very personal, individual level. I think we all need to take seriously. I think it's your job, it's my job, it's everybody's in this room's jobs, as well as government and the private sector. I think the ideal situation that I would imagine is really that one has a partnership of all three sectors. And I think in a theoretical way, this could work very well, where a government is working in partnership with the companies, with the civil society. In the practice, although this is sometimes very difficult, if you look at, let's say, Russia, for example, or Iran, or even China, sometimes it's not so easy for the government and the companies and civil society to work together. Or if they do work together, it's under a certain kind of a dictatorship that doesn't really allow for the kinds of exchange that I'd love to see there. So theoretically, my answer to your question is it's actually everyone's responsibility. And I've also experienced that firsthand as well. I think really everything that you do or don't do every day is an expression of who you are, right? You're expressing, part of your identity, part of your culture. And I think that's something we need to be aware of and also to be responsible of, in terms of really finding a way to actually deal respectfully with each other and to be aware also of our own our humility in that sense. And so in that sense, I would say really it's something for all of us. And I think where would you ask, who should take the lead there? I would say in that sense, probably we the people or citizens. As I look at a big timetable of the evolution of culture diplomacy, I would argue culture diplomacy began a long time ago. Really in ancient times, the first human beings who interacted, whether it was exchanging a piece of gold, for an animal or this and that, really those very simple transactions where there was no language, really no sophisticated ways of expressing each other. That in and of itself, I would argue, is where culture diplomacy began. Those interactions were in some way an expression of each other's cultures, and in some way probably did lead to a certain trust, or the opposite of trust, where maybe they then killed each other or fought with each other. And if you move the timetable forward, what happened in the 20th century, I would say, to be provocative, is maybe governments kidnapped cultural diplomacy. And they said, aha, this is a good way for us to promote our agenda. 1971, Alliance Française, 1974, Dante Alighieri, the early 19th century British Council, Goethe Institute, etc., where governments, said, aha, this is excellent. This is another tool we can have in our toolkit. We've got economic diplomacy, we've got political diplomacy. And I'm being provocative there in the sense I don't think it's necessarily a bad thing that governments kidnap this. Although the challenge is that very often the issue of trust and legitimacy is much more difficult. Because as long as it's a governmental initiative, we're always going to be skeptical. Are they just promoting the interests of the government? Are they really trying to bring us together for trust, or is there some other agenda? And obviously, certain governments are even more provocative than others. So that's a provocative way of showing you how I think the 20th century was quite exceptional. And I think what's happening today is perhaps cultural diplomacy is going back to its roots. Something that began as genuinely being people to people, citizen to citizen. I think we're seeing tendencies is going back in that direction. And I think that's a good thing. I think if we really have this grassroots idea of citizens coming together to help other citizens, that's a really pure and a really authentic thing that can be very positive. On the other hand, I want to caution you, as I've cautioned also our graduate students, I don't believe that neutrality exists in the world. And even civil society can also be bad, right? You could argue Osama bin Laden. He had an NGO, a very effective NGO, very well organized, really good communication, but he had, let's say, bad intentions in that sense. So cultural diplomacy is not always necessarily good, and being by the people is also not necessarily good. I mean, you've got religious cults, you've got all kinds of groups, coming together. But in essence, the idea of civil society, I think, allows for more flexibility than maybe the limitations a government may have, or a company, where they're most concerned with making a profit or getting more clients. So that's maybe too long of an answer, but I would say in essence, it's all of our responsibility, but civil society, for me, ideally, would really take the lead. And really, this is something by the people, for the people, and then they can work together with the governments, together with the private sector. And I think we're inspiring a number of hands. You have the microphones. I guess we'll come to you next, but I saw there was a hand over there too, so then we'll go to the other side, please.
Yeah, just in the spirit of knowledge sharing, and to add a concrete example to what you're talking about, which I think also addresses your question, you mentioned civil society organizations collaborating with governments to see through cultural diplomacy programming, and I worked in this sector for the last 5 years in the United States, and how the United States runs their cultural diplomacy, their cultural exchange programs, is in a public-private partnership, and this is a model that a lot of nations are going towards. So the U.S. Department of State designates private sector organizations, and some of them are companies for profit, and some are not for profit, mission-driven organizations, to basically run and administer the cultural exchanges. So this is internships in the United States, high school year in the US, being an au pair, being a camp counselor, going for a year on university exchange. So the private sector, we would, for example, in my role as a program manager, I was responsible to actually report to the US government. They would audit us, they would ask us for information. I would go to them with policy questions as well. And then we also had free reign to kind of make sure that cultural immersion was happening, manage crises if people experience emergencies in the United States, help people through the visa process. We actually could issue them the official government paperwork to get the visa from the US embassies around the world. So just an example of how this is actually utilized in the United States and is a model that a lot of nations are moving towards, because it allows the programs to kind of escape from bureaucracy and be a little bit more creative and driven by civil society, but it's still closely regulated by the government, and it ensures that it's fulfilling a government mission as well, public diplomacy mission.
Good. Excellent. Let's continue, because I don't want to cut anyone off. I think over here. Yeah. Okay.
Thank you. In one of the lectures yesterday, the curation director, I'm probably going to completely butch his name, Ogujon Civilisik, he was sharing with us his career in the film industry and also his experience of going to the films. And in contrary to what you were saying about how these days films are more accessible, and that's obviously a good thing, he was saying actually films were far more powerful as a tool when cinema was one of the only places that you could experience film, as it was a place that brought people together and you were obliged to watch a film from beginning to end. And I guess there's also the discussion that comes after that, whereas these days I see films sometimes as a very solitary activity. Lots of people watch them at home on their laptop, they don't even finish a film. So I just kind of wanted to see what everyone else thought of this, if they feel, even though these days there are more voices, there are more stories being told, is it more effective as a form of cultural diplomacy?
I mean, that's a good question, and that's maybe also for at least the MA students who are here, maybe also a challenge to you guys, because I think it would be cool to have sort of a film club where we show a film and have a discussion afterwards. Maybe as corny as that sounds, but it could be great. I mean, I can think of already 10 great movies. I actually want to show you the trailer for one of them I just saw here that I think are great examples of cultural diplomacy, and I think that would be interesting. And it is hard sometimes when you're at home, falling asleep on your couch or whatever, to actually have those discussions. So that's another question, actually, maybe for all of you as well, just to underline what you were saying. What is the role of actually the cinema itself, a physical place where people actually go and see these things. And maybe for, again, those of us who will be with us for the whole semester, if anyone's interested, I'd love to maybe have a tradition like that starting here. We've got the facilities, so from my point of view, once a week or whenever, we could actually do that, show a film and have a discussion. And I think that'd be really interesting, especially with the MA students where we're coming from all over the world. Just actually each of us can share one film, say why it's important, and we can discuss it. So in case anyone wants to pick up on that. If not, we can also take other questions, comments. Or if there's a lull, let me try to provoke you. This is another trailer that I wanted to share with you. Has anyone ever heard of the movie LA Crash, a movie in 2004? A really cool film I saw actually when I was in college. For me, it's an ideal cultural diplomacy film. It's dealing with all of the race issues, discrimination issues in Los Angeles in terms of racism, religious. It's also after September 11th, they picked up on the whole Islam question. I'm not sure if this trailer is going to capture all of that, but I would recommend you guys to see it. It's a good movie too. You've got a good group of actors. Robert De Niro is in here, as well as a number of other quite famous actors. But it really deals with this problematic of actually these cultures crashing together in a cool way. So just to give you a clip of a recent film, speaking of film as cultural diplomacy, that I think really does tackle this issue of actually cultural diplomacy and lack thereof in a provocative but also a sensitive way. And if you see the whole film from beginning to end, I think this trailer shows you some of more of the problems. But the film itself also shows you in a very elegant way as it goes on how these problems actually work themselves out, and really surprises also the viewers as well, where really what you think will happen in a sad way doesn't happen. So it's an interesting film. I'll just show you briefly to do a little advertising.
Es ist das Gefühl der Berührung.
It's in English, in German.
Fuß, verstehst du?
So, all right, hold on, I didn't realize that. How do we do it? Just put it in English. All right, get you 1 second. I just did a little Google search. Let's do it quick. English. Again, just because I did want to show you at least one. Of course, now I loaded this while we were talking, so let's see if it'll load quick. Looks good. Let's try it. Yeah, Sandra Bullock, you see here. It's a pretty big group. And everybody has to keep their fingers crossed that the internet cooperates, otherwise it won't work. The German one loaded, so normally it should. Otherwise, we could also take a question while it's loading as well. Does anyone have another comment or question that they want to give in the dark? This way they have more privacy, or no? I don't see hands, or no? Because I know we also had a Swiss contribution. I'm referring to our one student who sent me an SMS in case you wanted to share your project with the group, either in the dark or once the lights are on. I'm challenging you, think about it, because obviously we can speak one-on-one about this, but I think it would be interesting. I'm not sure the project that you had, maybe also to just share that for the others. They can maybe give feedback or ideas as well as I can, in giving you feedback publicly, the others get an idea, that's how ICD can help. So. Any Swiss contributions in the dark? Yes. Okay, it looks like we do have a Swiss contribution in the dark. All right, so I'll pause this. Let's let it load. And Esteban, if you can, maybe turn the lights on for a second. But
Well, I think I talked to most of the people about the project I'm doing, but one part of the project I could now talk about is there is the idea, or I do have the idea that it would be very powerful for cultural diplomacy to create some kind of a community of cultural diplomats, in the sense that, as we were mentioning, but when we were, somebody was asking about responsibility, who is actually the main actor of cultural diplomacy, and I think it was also one of the questions which came up several times this week. And I'm convinced that everybody is responsible and everybody can can contribute something to cultural diplomacy or cultural relations. It doesn't need to be called diplomacy. And also because compared to before, when diplomacy was something which would happen abroad, so between diplomats traveling abroad, we are nowadays, everybody's in the situation that we are encountering, or that we are exposed to intercultural relations every time when we, probably in the morning when we wake up, either already at home or when we get out in the streets. So we have many cultures living together, and I think this is a big challenge for many regions which are having troubles to getting used to that. And in this sense, I think it's really important to create some kind of a community that supports each other in activities that each of us can do and share. And I would, for example, see some kind of success story blog where people would share their own stories from where they see that intercultural relations have led to success, even in specifically in the field of all types of arts. And also in the sense that people do not feel alone, that they see that there is a critical mass supporting this idea and this perspective of the world. And also with the goal to contribute or to add an alternative perspective of the world, and giving more visibility and voice to this positive outcome of intercultural interactions. So that's one part of the idea, and I think, once I get this happening, I would of course invite all of you to join this and to share whenever in your situations, wherever you do what kind of activity which is in this field of intercultural relations, to share this,
And do you have a specific idea in the sense where you're thinking of starting in an online way, sort of a virtual setting, or how would you begin, such a network? I mean, like in a physical location or more via a web platform, what would be your idea?
Well, I actually think of several pillars on which I would build the project, and this one is like the international community pillar, but there would also be a more local, with interaction with the local artists, theaters, music, concert halls, where actually cultural activities will take place. But this is like another pillar of the project. I think, well, for me the goal, and for me what I just saw in international cultural diplomacy is it stays at a very top level and does have trouble to reach out to even to its own diaspora. And for me that's definitely very important to have, to add, in addition to these cultural events, have something which is on a digital level and can reach out really to the world community, because it's a topic which is universal and where people can contribute from wherever they are.
No, it sounds
So,
good. I mean,
yeah,
my quick reaction to that, I think, obviously a great idea. Definitely there's a niche. And what I would suggest to you is to maybe do both, to try to be really focused on local and global at the same time. Yeah. If you can start something in, the Swiss city where you are, with a high school group there, et cetera, start there. Take some photos of it, maybe get a few, commentaries or something, put it up on the webpage, and then we can connect it to maybe something that somebody does in Austria or something that somebody does in, wherever. And then we can kind of inspire each other, really local. So, let's affect 10 kids, or let's affect 30 retired people in Western Berlin, or who knows, just to show different communities that are actually involved, artists, etc. And then it can kind of grow. And I think the interesting thing by linking it, as you said, for a network or online, is then we can really inspire each other. Say, this is how they dealt with this issue in this part of Kreuzberg, Berlin, where they've got a lot of foreigners, or this is how they did it in the Swiss city, maybe where there were less foreigners. And so that would be one idea. But it would be a shame, I think, if it just stayed on the abstract theoretical, just like kind of the website, this and that. I think what's interesting about it is being able to zoom in. And I think the more we can zoom in really close to a neighborhood, to a city, to a certain group, I think the more interesting it is. And probably also the more success it'll have, because then you can show probably over a shorter period of time at least some concrete results. So it's a very interesting idea that maybe via Facebook afterwards we can also share and kind of all chip in.
Regarding this project, one question I actually have is
Sure.
the idea is to give kind of a title to people who are active in this field. So the first thing which comes to mind is, of course, cultural diplomat. But I'm not sure if this is legally protected, or if this, if
no,
it would
it's
be
not. So
possible,
obviously,
or,
you're free to do that. I mean, we didn't protect it. It's not. So anyone can be a cultural diplomat. I think in general, I've noticed people refer relatively loosely to the term. Keep in mind, diplomacy is not always looked upon as a positive thing. Many of my Americans back home really are, much more kind of gung-ho hero, hard power societies as opposed to diplomacy. So keep that in mind. And also, sometimes there's a little bit of a baggage that comes with diplomacy, where people think it's linked to the government or this and that. So not every rapper or jazz musician would necessarily want to be called a diplomat in that sense, or a cultural diplomat. But of course, that would be an option. You can do it. I think there's no problem legally with that. And I think the idea of giving some sort of accreditation is also good. I mean, just think of the United Nations Goodwill Ambassadors. They're not paid for this and that, but I think that is a status that actually I've heard from both sides helps both. The UN is grateful to the Goodwill Ambassadors and vice versa. So I think the idea of giving it some sort of a framework or a title is good. Give somebody a little bit more respect. Show them, hey, look, don't just perform and entertain these guys. Do something more. Maybe my one, statement that you make while you're performing, or by bringing different groups together, or performing in an interesting place. So in essence, I think it is a good idea. I'm not sure what we could call it. I mean, we could call it cultural diplomat. Maybe we can think of something even better. But I think it could be an effective way of trying to support and also encourage artists to do more than just perform. So, excellent.
Thank you. Feel free to get in contact with me if you have ideas or. Yeah.
Excellent. And I'm glad you did that before the lunch. By the way, lunch is ready, so we'll wrap it up in a few minutes. But that way, again, let's feel free to continue that conversation there. The internet does work, by the way. I was able to succeed. So just for fun, let me share with you again one film that I think is a worthwhile film for cultural diplomacy. LA Crash. Let's see if it's in English this time.
It's the sense of touch. Any real city, you walk, you know? You brush past people, people bump into you. In LA, nobody touches you. We're always behind this metal and glass.
How far can bullets go?
You thinking about that bullet that came through your window?
What's wrong? You all right?
I am angry all the time, and I don't know why.
Put your hands on top of your head, ma'am.
Well, you just do what he says.
Now, do you have any guns or knives or anything I might get stuck with?
Your brother's file. Kid's going away for life for stealing a car.
All I need to do to make this disappear is to frame a potentially innocent man.
Did you find your brother?
Oh.
Tell him to come home.
Why do you keep everybody a certain distance, huh? What, you start to feel something and panic? What I need is a husband who will not just stand there.
What did you want me to do? Get us both shot? Get out of the car!
Give me the key!
I just had a gun pointed in my face, and it was my fault because I knew it was gonna happen.
Hands in plain sight, step out of the vehicle.
Honey, stay inside!
Man, don't walk up on me! I know this man! Get back!
Now you're out there swimming.
You think you know who you are? You have no idea.
You had a conversation with God, huh? What did God say?
I'm trying to help you.
I didn't ask for your help, did I?
It's okay, Daddy. I'll protect you.
It's the sense of touch. I think we miss that touch so much that we crash into each other just so we can feel something.
Something else, money? People, man. People.
So anyway, just a film tip for you guys to think about as you're having your lunch. It's an interesting movie. This didn't really do justice to it, this trailer, but really it's a deep movie in the sense they deal with a lot of the stereotypes, the whole issue also with Islam. There's a scene actually where there's an Iranian shop owner who basically has a supermarket, and then he, for security, has a company come to install the locks. Happens to be a Latino, I think a Mexican, I'm not sure, Puerto Rican, who's actually installing the locks. And you can see just already there, the Iranian and the Puerto Rican, there's sort of a tension there, this issue of trust, you know, can they trust each other, this and that. And then sure enough, the shop gets robbed. And of course, the first idea of this Iranian is, it was probably that Latino who installed the locks, you know, he tricked me and this and that. So then he goes to his house with the gun and this and that. And I won't tell you how it ends, but really an interesting way of dealing with all of those issues. And in the end, as I said, it's a positive ending, but just in a really intense way, you see this, the white-black issues you saw a little bit there. Again, all sorts of issues. So anyway, a fun movie, check it out. I'd recommend it, dealing with a lot of these issues in an effective way. There's many other movies as well, of course. That was just one since the 1950 movie didn't work that I was going to show you. But before we move to the lunch break, are there any other comments, questions, ideas that you'd like to discuss as a group? This is unfortunately one of the last times this group will be all together in the same room in the same place. As I was telling some of you last week, I really do hope, though, that this is really the beginning of our network, whether it's from the Swiss initiative, a network that we may actually physically be able to stay together that way. Of course, you're all encouraged to join the ICD Facebook page. Please do. That's also a good way for us to also keep in touch with you. You know, we send announcements there, etc., for future events. Everyone in this room is now officially an alumni, even though some of you are staying for much longer, especially the graduate students. So you're part of the group already. And we really do hope it goes two ways. Here, you all came from sometimes great distances to Berlin for a couple of days. Hopefully, you were inspired. Hopefully, you got to hear some insights, some exchanges that have benefited you. Maybe not necessarily to teach you something you didn't know, but at least that you think a little bit differently now about this issue or that issue. And we'd love, as a next step, that you actually come back and say, okay, Mark, I'd love to do a conference together with you 3 months from now. Or next time you're in Vienna, or next time you're in Nigeria, or wherever, let's do something together. Or, hey, Mark, can I partner partner, can I establish a partnership between my university and the ICD? Any kind of an idea or a project like that would be ideal, or just letting us know about something you're doing, to see maybe a local grassroots project that you did on your own. I think that could be great, even for our Facebook group, Culture Diplomacy News, or also Berlin Global, which are our two sort of online news agencies. We can write an article about it. Let's tell the world. And I think every small event like that or small initiative can also have really big impacts. So those are a few of my requests, my wishes for all of you, that we can stay together. Probably out of everyone in this room, not everyone is going to go and do some initiative, but maybe 1/3 of you will, and that would be great. You know, if 30% in this room were to go and actually implement some of the things we spoke about the last few days, I think that would be a great contribution. So those are some of my hopes and expectations. I'll stick around a little bit in the restaurant in case you guys do want to have any one-on-one questions or conversations. My family is here as well if you want to see culture diplomacy in practice. My 3 little kids, Amina, Jibril, and Ryan, as well as my wife. So you can see how I'm practicing culture diplomacy at home. In German or English, you can also speak to them. And anyway, but no, it was a pleasure to get to know all of you. I'm looking forward to especially the graduate students continuing this journey throughout the semester and beyond. And to those who are unfortunately not able to continue, let's say starting next week, please do stay in touch, via email, via Facebook, via projects. And we really look forward to continuing and maybe meeting again next year around this time, where you can actually give more of the lectures, such as Tatiana. Actually, Tatiana was here initially as a participant, was it 6 years ago now? Or I'm not sure, a while ago. 7 already, and then she came to a number of conferences, and now she's not only lecturing, but also representing ICD. The last event she represented us was in Kosovo, when my daughter was actually being born, so I wasn't able to come, and she actually represented us. So just to give you one example of an alumni who really takes this seriously, what I just told you, and has come with really interesting ideas, and already now, actually, you came to Berlin with a proposal for, I think, a really good project, which you should also maybe share with the others over lunch or in informal ways. But it can happen, so I'm not just telling you, nice things that could happen in the future, but one success story is sitting right next to you. So thank you again to all of you. I wish you a bon appetit. I don't want to keep you waiting any longer. They've prepared some nice food for you there. And I look forward to continuing our collaboration in different ways with each of you. But thank you very much. Thanks. And now let's eat. So we'll move next door to the restaurant.